What's up, y'all? Shuffle. And today's video is a starter guide for The Last Spell, which came out officially in 1.0 about 5 days ago as of the recording of this, and it's been doing very well in terms of just reach and people playing it and streaming it and stuff like that, so it's really cool. This is my favorite game of 2022. It's a really awesome game. You should definitely play it if you're interested. And in case you do have it, and you're like, what the heck do all these stats and stuff mean? Well, we're going to talk about that. So purpose of this video is to go over the basics, like what the game is, how it plays, and some other tips and explanations to help get you going. So without any further ado, it's a very well-timed throat clear to help break my momentum. Thanks, buddy. All right, so with The Last Spell, what is it? It's a base defense roguelike. It's about the best way to describe it. It's got a lot of RPG elements, obviously, but the key things that you're doing are defending your haven from waves of monsters, and a lot of things change in between runs except for the maps themselves. So what does change each run? The first things that change are the heroes that you start with, the monsters that appear, and the other progression stuff that you've unlocked gets added to the run. And so it's only a few things. It seems like I said, the maps stay the same, like the shops, the gears, the monster placement, the waves, where they come from, and your starting heroes and the heroes you can pick up at the end, all of those change. And so if we look at this file that I have, I've been streaming this one. This is Lakeburg. This is the second map. No other spoilers than that, but this is the base. This is the second level, and these are the heroes that I currently have. And so all of these always change between runs. So whoever you have access to, if you go to the inn and stuff, this also changes. So whoever you can recruit, these change. You can re-roll it. Like, so all of this stuff changes. As I said before too, the shop changes. So everything that's in here will change every time you play. You can re-roll it too, but just every time you play, these recycle or reset, whatever you want to say. So the last thing that changes that I'm not gonna show, or I'll show it, but I'm not gonna show it like right this second, is the monsters change. So the direction they come at and their composition will change for the most part. So that's stuff you have to be aware of. And then finally, your meta progression, which I think it's gonna be spoiler free. Let's check. Okay, yeah, so thankfully really don't get to see anything spoilerific, but yeah, so the things you unlock, from the favors, these are part of your meta progression. Then the other side of your meta progression that you buy with Tainted Essence. Once you buy these, they get put into your run immediately, actually. But unless it's an Omen, we'll talk about Omens later. But Omens, you have to pick at the start of the run. So if you buy something here or unlock something, it gets dropped into your run immediately, and you have access to it. And those are the things that change. Something people like to ask about is, what is the core gameplay loop of The Last Spell? So the core gameplay loop is you have a base building turn, which is what we're doing right now. So you can level up your heroes, pick their perks, build them, go shopping, manage your base, get rid of the corpses, build defenses, move stuff around, move your heroes, recharge them with your mana wells, temples, and stuff like that. So those are the things you can do during the day. And for those menus, it's pretty straightforward. You have to spend your workers too, but you can press this button, which is over here under the gold section, or press Z. I like to use the hotkeys. You can see all the stuff you can build. Some of the things have limits. Then the shop, this is the B key, or if you click that right there, you get to shop, as we talked about a second ago. And then the inn used to be R, but now it's M. I'm not a fan of that, but there you go. And you can get characters here. You unlock the inn eventually with meta progression. It's one of the first things. And then you can spend gold to increase your hero capacity and get extra people. The other thing you can do during your base building turn is construct defenses. This is the X key, or you just click this part where it says materials. And you can spend your pretty much just bricks, but those are your materials to build defenses. So you can build walls, barricades, gates, traps. You unlock these later. Ballista, you unlock these later. Catapults are later. Watchtowers, so if you want to put an archer in there, someone with like a longbow or a rifle, they can see over everything except a couple things go against that rule, but for the most part they can see everywhere that's around them. But you can't move, but then you can shoot stuff, and it's pretty cool. Then finally there's warp gates. So warp gates, you put these around your base, and whenever you stand on it, you can teleport to the other ones. It doesn't matter how far they are. but they're all technically connected. So if you're on one end of the map, step on a warp gate, you can teleport to the other end of the map. And then finally, we have your workers. This is probably the most important part of your economy. So you get to decide what you do with the workers, and your buildings will give you the actions on what you can do with them. So you can assign them to this stuff. It'll show you how many workers it takes above the action to do this. And they can also clear corpses, you know, depending on what you want to do with the corpses. Sometimes you clear them, sometimes you don't, because they actually serve as roadblocks to the enemy, so they have to like break them to get through. So it can actually help you out and give you defensive presence. But the other thing too is you can demolish buildings, and this is really helpful on some maps because some maps have a lot of, you know, ruined buildings that serve no purpose besides, you know, just blocking the enemies from you. But if you want to scavenge them for materials, you can do that too. Very important to scavenge and not destroy, because you get nothing if you destroy it. So that's it for the workers, but they're very important. They can go mine and stuff like that. The mines and material camps are really important. There's crafting buildings you can do. And as I was saying before, like mana well, temple, and other stuff. They pretty much do everything. They're like the lifeblood of your base, so you should be using them. They're probably the thing you should rush the soonest in your base. And then your buildings also get free actions. These are the ones that cost 0 workers. So you can click here and it cycles through them and shows you what's available. And you can, you know, there's a few that do different stuff, but the main ones are like temple and mana well, which heal your health and mana. Then one more thing I forgot to talk about in the defense section is there's this button here that's repair. So if you click into either, you know, building stuff or defenses, this whole menu pops up. I don't know what the hotkey is off the top of my head. I don't even know if it has a hotkey, but there's also the repair function. And so you can repair individuals, you can repair identical. So if you want to repair, you know, only your walls, you can do that. And then if you need to repair your buildings, that costs money, but then you can repair all your defenses at one time, including reloading your traps if you need to. So this is really helpful. This is better than just clicking on repair building and then individually hitting everything. So you see there, just spend all of our stuff, heals all my walls right now. And then we're ready to go in that regard. So that's the first half of the gameplay loop. The second half is combat. The most important things to consider when doing combat are your stats and the weapons your characters have equipped. Whatever your skills you're allowed to use are dictated by the weapon they're wielding, and your stats that make all of this happen are your AP, which are your action points, and your movement points. So that's how you get around, that's how you hit stuff. And then finally, there are your stats. So these statistics are pretty varied in what they do. So I guess we'll take a minute here to discuss them because they are pretty in-depth. So the first ones are pretty self-explanatory. I think if you've ever played an RPG, like health, mana, flat damage, crit, all those are pretty straightforward. Accuracy, dodge, like I'm pretty sure everyone understands how those work, and you know, AP and movement and stuff like that. But in case you don't understand how these work, you know, health is just how much damage you take, mana fuels your skills, crit your chance to do bonus damage, flat damage, damage increase, accuracy is your chance to hit, dodge is your chance to not be hit. But the ones that do warrant some coverage here in the character sheet are resistance and resist reduction. So resistance is if you get hit by direct damage, I don't think it applies to poison. So if you get hit by direct damage, it shaves off that percentage of damage. So if you get hit for 100 and you have 25, percent resist, you get hit for 75. Resist reduction is like a straight resistance stat penetration. So if the enemy has, just looking at these, if they have 24% resistance and then your resist reduction is 16, then you just subtract these and you have 8% resistance. So that shaves off 8% damage. Even though this says resistance can't be decreased below 0, that's only for like this thing. There's actually a resist reduction cap from Tome, which is a weapon that can actually do it. So it's the skill 2 here. Weakening touch, this reduces resistance. This can drop someone's resistance down to -50, which means you're doing 50% bonus damage, which is pretty cool. And then our last two stats on the main page, our primary stats to talk about, are block. This shaves off just a flat amount of incoming damage. So if I have 13 block, I get hit for, 15 damage. I take only 2 from there. So that's why block is really good. And it's helpful for a lot of characters that are probably going to get hit a few times. Armor is kind of like a protective shield. So if you take damage to your armor, it takes damage first before your HP, and then your armor recharges at the end of or at the start of the next turn. So if you get hit and you still have like 10 armor, you're not taking any HP damage, the next turn rolls around, your armor recharges back to full. So it's pretty helpful in that regard. You have those actually 3 defensive measures to help protect your HP, because if you had 0 HP, you die. And then we have the secondary stats page, and there's a lot here, but most of them are pretty straightforward. You have daily regen to see how much you pick up at the end of the night before you go into the next battle. That's how much you heal. Crit power down here, this is just the multiplier that increases your critical damage. XP, healing received, those are pretty straightforward, I would hope. These are just percentages. Skill range, this is how far your skills can go, but it's important to know that the skill has to have range for that to happen. So like a sword with a melee strike that only goes 1 space, it's always going to go 1 space. But if you have a range attack, that goes 2 spaces, and then you get 2 skill range, it now goes 4 spaces. So it gets more reach, which is really helpful. And then we have flat damages here. So physical, magic, and range, that just adds the appropriate percentage to the appropriate damage type. Reliability, it picks up your minimum damage. So if you have, 100 to 150 damage, and you have 10% reliability, it brings up your minimum to 110. So reliability is good for some weapons, not great for others, but it's never a bad stat to have a little bit of. And then let's see, we have stun chance. So stun chance is just your additional chance to stun an enemy, very straightforward. Poison damage. Poison doesn't get scaled by other stats. You have to get poison damage specifically, but the more poison damage you get, obviously the more poison damage you do. And the reason it's locked behind a secondary stat instead of, all the other stuff is because, I should say that's separated, is because poison damage ignores most of the other mechanics that we're talking about. So if you hit the enemy with the attack, your poison will ignore their armor, it'll ignore their resist, I believe, and it'll ignore their block, and they just get hit by the poison. So if they have, 1,000 armor and 100 life, and you poison them for 100 damage, they just drop dead. So poison, very deservedly so, has its own secondary attribute, because it can be very good, but you have to really lean into it. But, poison has its own drawbacks. And then our other things to talk about here, so multi-hit. If a skill can be cast multiple times, I think I have a wand user somewhere. This makes it so every time a move that can be cast multiple times is used, you can use it again. So right here, Magic Missile for this character, normally Magic Missile only hits 4 times, but at the bottom there you see it says multi-hit 5 instead of 4, and that's because I have +1 multi-hit on the character. And so multi-hit only applies to multi-hit weapons. It's not every single attack you do can hit multiple times, it's just multi-hit skills get extra shots. And that's actually really good because it can scale up your damage pretty high since you're just getting more shots of it. It's really nice. And then we have propagation and propagation bounces. So propagation is your weapon chaining to other things. This is really easy to see with some things like weakening touch on tome, because you see there's a propagation stat, and lightning strike again with tome. Tome's pretty good at explaining some mechanics. The more propagation bounces you have, the more times it jumps. If it kills a target as it's going through and it doesn't have a path back, then it just ends. So it's not gonna like jump, 3 tiles away to go find someone. They have to be next to each other. Only diagonal propagation if you have a perk. You can see there, it scales down the damage a little bit because you're hitting multiple targets, but you can ramp up that damage by increasing your propagation damage. So you kind of need both of these unless you're doing something specific like bee sting. You don't want damage, you want bounces in that case, but damage still isn't bad. So propagation, again, same thing like multi-hit. It has to be on a skill that propagates. It's not going to chain your, melee hammer strike to the next guy. And then we have finally our super big damage increases. So opportunism is if an enemy has a negative effect, so if they're stunned, poisoned, or have a debuff like weakening touch, then you do percentage bonus damage against them. There's no other requirement for that. This applies to all of your attacks, not just the ones that have the opportunism tag. So this can really help you get some extra damage if you have access to stun and debuffs and stuff like that. Isolation, this is pretty much the boss killing stat alongside momentum, but isolation is if there's a target that doesn't have an ally next to it, then you do increased damage to that person. So if we can actually grab some of our guys here, and I'll show you exactly what it looks like. So I'll grab like this little cluster. I could use everyone if I really wanted to, but I think these three exemplify it. So what is considered adjacent is someone who is directly touching them. So there's only the 4 spots. So if we use this guy in the middle, it's this, you know, axe person right here. They're considered adjacent. Meanwhile, our person up here or down here now that's diagonal is not considered adjacent. So if you have this situation where there's 2 next to each other, no one is isolated. If you have this situation where they're diagonal to each other, they're both isolated, unless there's other, you know, stuff in the mix. But that's how it triggers. And isolation is, again, if they're by themselves, it increases the damage by a set amount. The reason why this is a really good boss killing stat is because most bosses are either isolated when they show up, or they're easy to isolate when you're fighting them because you just kill like a little bit of the trash next to them. Once they're isolated, you're getting bonus damage. And then finally there's momentum, which the reason why this is the other boss killer stat is just because this is really easy to ramp up. And when I say boss killer stat, I mean not even just bosses themselves. I mean like the elites and just the big tough enemies that have, you know, like 2000 HP and stuff like that. This is one of the ways you kill them, is having momentum. So you have to have a balance between wiping out groups with things like propagate and multi-hit, and then you have to have a character that can, usually more than one if you can ideally do it, but they have some access to either like opportunism, isolation, or momentum to help you kill those huge threats. And so momentum generates when you're moving. So if you just walk around, or if you use jump abilities or pull yourself to other enemies and stuff, then and dashes, then momentum is charging up, including your basic walking, which I think I said, but just in case I didn't. Momentum does not charge on teleports. So you can't teleport 10 spaces, then teleport back 10 spaces, and then get 20 points worth of momentum. I think I just clipped the mic there. I apologize. But momentum also caps at pretty high. And so momentum, if you can charge it up and do one super big hit, then it does a ton of damage. Momentum also only is used through momentum skills. So as we see here with the scepter at the bottom, it says momentum plus 30. That means that this is a momentum skill. Meanwhile, if we look at the other skill on the scepter, it's a propagation skill. This does not generate, or this does not benefit from momentum. And so momentum is probably the hardest to play because you really have to consider where you're moving, when you're spending it, and stuff like that. But it's very powerful. There's a reason it's been nerfed. I think that's it for stats. And then I believe our next topic is the actual combat. During combat, you are doing your best to use your AP and movement skills in order to kill the waves of monsters attacking the Haven. There are key things to consider, like target priority and what weapons and damage types do better against which monsters. And if you can make sure all of that is on target, then your chance of victory will increase. In terms of damage, we talked about poison being its own separate entity, but it's important to understand the other 3 damage types. So there's physical, magical, and range damage. So physical damage will always deal double damage to armor. So if an enemy has a ton of armor and you have a melee character that does physical damage, then you're going to blow up that armor much quicker than an archer, for example. Next is magic damage. So enemies that have a very high resistance stat that we talked about earlier that was on the stat page, the enemies can have that stat as well. Resistance is countered by magic. Resistance is innately penetrated by magic damage. So if you're having trouble with those types of enemies like Kindled or Accursed, then make sure you have some source of magic damage on the team. The final type of damage is range damage, and it is the most straightforward, but it also has the least amount of benefit. So unlike magic and physical, which can help you deal with resistance and armor respectively, range damage doesn't get any of those types of bonuses. It doesn't scale off physical damage, and it doesn't penetrate resistance like magic does. So with that in mind, the penalties do make a lot of sense because range is incredibly easy to build for. You don't usually have to focus on defenses, you can just build straight damage. A lot of damage stats really help it, and it's very easy to play as well as being AP efficient. So just because it doesn't get anything cool like resistance penetration or double armor damage means you shouldn't ignore it. The last couple things we have to talk about are Omens and Apocalypse. So Omens are little benefits you give yourself at the start of each run. This helps to diversify them. So if you want to employ a certain strategy, you can pick up omens for it, or if you just want to test some stuff out or do something fun, then you pick the appropriate ones. There's also boundless mode, which lets you put on as many as you want, and it can make the game really fun in a different way, because you can just do all kinds of, you know, goofy stuff at that point, like just having only archers because you have all the range weapon omens on, stuff like that. And you unlock these through meta progression. So really tailoring these to your playstyle is some of the fun. So I definitely recommend pretty much trying everything at some point, because there's a lot of cool combinations you can put together. And then finally, Apocalypse is the scaling difficulty system. So if you're having an easy time with the base difficulty of the game, then consider throwing on some Apocalypse levels. And Apocalypse levels go up to 6 currently, and as you can see here, they start with enemies get 20% more life, the waves are 30% bigger, that's level 2. The mist sensors are level 3, and that is these purple things on the map. When the fighting starts, these obscure the area around them, so it's much harder to, you can't hit enemies under them, and so you have to sink in some damage to destroy the mist sensors. Level 4 is probably the hardest one, at least for me, and that is golden materials. The cost of them is 20% more, which really hurts your economy, and it can be very difficult to keep up with the game's constant demand of improved gear if everything costs more than it did before. Level 5, the enemies get extra move points. They pretty much get to your base like a turn faster, so this can be pretty dangerous on certain enemies. And then number 6 is gear that is not your starter gear will roll negative attributes to go against, what is it, stuff you are building for. So like right here, we just look at this one. Wands normally don't have -3 block, you know, that's just what this rolled. Sometimes the negatives really don't matter, because it could be something like a stat you just don't care about, you know, like I got minus crit power and some stuff, like, you know, a mage with minus armor and then plus armor, like, you know, who cares about that? So 6, like level 6 Apocalypse kind of, it sucks, but it's, you know, a bit easier to play around than some of the others. And I think that's it though for the stats. So if there's something I missed or something you have a question for, definitely throw it down below in the comments. I hope you found this video insightful. I know there's a lot of stuff to go over. It's a lot of stats, a lot of specifics, but really understanding that will help you improve your game. And actually, I do have a couple tips for you before we head out of here. So stuff to talk about with tips. One of the first things we should do is use backup weapons. So you see here, my characters all have, like, you know, 2 weapons equipped, except unless I have a specialist somewhere. But yeah, the more you unlock, the more helpful your second weapon becomes. You can swap to it with tab. Actually, if we see here, down here, this doesn't cost you anything, and so this really helps you either buff up your primary weapon or give you other ways to debuff enemies and spend your AP. Our next tip is for the best upgrades, AP and movement if you can get them. Then the final tip I'll give is use whatever weapons sound fun to you. You know, you can do pretty much whatever. The game is very flexible in how you build, and there's a lot of fun stuff. So if you want to use pistols and swords and make a bunch of pirates, you know, just go ahead, do that. Or if you want to use a bunch of mages, that's also good. Like, everything works. Definitely consider that when you're building characters. Just keep trying stuff, unlock more stuff, and keep trying it. You will be pleasantly surprised at how many things are good and how many things actually work in the game. It's very well balanced in that way. So that's it for the video. If there's other stuff you want to know about, then drop it in the comments and stuff, and ask questions. Drop into my Twitch stream, I'll answer whatever I see. And I really enjoyed this though. I like this game. I love this game. I love making stuff for it, so I hope you do too. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.